On the morning of April 12, 1961, as the Vostok 1 rocket thundered skyward, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. Cameras caught every detail of this historic flight, but one small object stands out in hindsight: a modest wristwatch strapped to the Soviet cosmonaut's arm. Gagarin was wearing a stainless steel Shturmansky watch on his left wrist. This unassuming 17-jewel timepiece, only 33 millimeters across, with sword-shaped hands and a bright red second hand, would claim its own place in history as the very first watch in space. In that instant, the culmination of Soviet aerospace ambition and humble watchmaking craftsmanship met, and the tiny navigator's watch became a symbol of the dawn of manned spaceflight.
Its presence evoked not just technical pride, a proof that Soviet technology could survive the rigors of space, but a human one too. Even out where seconds and minutes have no natural meaning, we still measure time to stay connected to home.
Yuri Gagarin's journey itself was a drama worthy of legend. A young pilot from a Siberian village, he was not initially the favored choice to go into space. But fate and high-level decisions made him commander of Vostok 1. At 7:10 a.m. Moscow time, he was launched aboard the Vostok 3Ka capsule. For 108 minutes, he rode the Vostok 1 spacecraft, completing one full orbit of the planet. The flight was intentionally brief, a single loop of Earth, but it answered the crucial question of whether a living person could survive weightlessness and re-entry. Gagarin splashed down safely into the Saratov region 2 hours later, greeted by Soviet officers with shouts of "Poyekhali," "Let's go," echoing the triumphant spirit of the mission. The Soviet Union had scored a staggering propaganda victory in the space race, and the world learned that a human being and his mechanical watch could indeed survive the void above us.
All through that historic flight, the Shturmansky on Gagarin's wrist quietly kept ticking. This was not a store-bought wristwatch, but a navigator's watch, built by the first Moscow watch factory, later known as Polyot, specifically for Soviet Air Force pilots. Gagarin had received it in 1957 upon graduating from flight school. The Type II Shturmansky was solidly built, a hand-wound 17-jewel movement, shock-resistant with a sealed case back to keep out dust and moisture. Its dial was simple and highly legible: luminescent baton hour markers, blued lance hands, and a distinctive red second hand ending in a small cloverleaf shape. Across the top of the ivory dial ran the Cyrillic word Shturmansky in a subtle rainbow pattern. And at 6 o'clock, the Soviet Air Force emblem stood proudly. At just 33 millimeters diameter, it was tiny by today's standards, but in the 1950s, that was typical for a pilot's watch. The crown was large and pillow-shaped, easy to grip, even while wearing a flight glove, and a hacking feature let Gagarin stop the seconds hand to synchronize his watch exactly before launch.
In sum, the Shturmansky was a rugged, military-grade tool, made to survive hard accelerations, extremes of temperature and pressure, and still keep precise time. Miraculously, the little Shturmansky lived up to its design. In the days immediately after Vostok, Gagarin himself reported that all his timepieces had performed flawlessly. When questioned by the State Commission the next day, he said, "The watches function perfectly. Normally, I set them and they are still keeping good time." He even demonstrated it in person. On April 13th, during a press conference, Gagarin rolled up his sleeve to show off the Shurmansky on his wrist and smiled. This Earth watch, it functions with pinpoint accuracy. In other words, neither the stresses of launch, the vacuum of space, nor the 27,400 km/h re-entry into the atmosphere had stopped the launch. It had passed the ultimate real-world test of reliability.
For the Soviet program, this was a feather in the cap of the first Moscow watch factory. Their aerospace watch had proven itself in orbit and back. Soon the original Sturmansky would go on display, a tangible artifact of the mission, at the new Museum of Cosmonautics in Moscow. After Gagarin's flight, the story of the Sturmansky didn't end, and Gagarin himself gave the watch he'd worn to Air Force Commander Konstantin Vershinin, a key figure in the Vostok launch program. Later, Vershinin's daughter donated it to the Cosmonaut Training Center Museum. Another Sturmansky, the one Gagarin wore under his spacesuit sleeve, apparently returned to the factory museum. Today, that original wristwatch is a prized exhibit in Moscow. The Sturmansky brand still honors this heritage. There are modern reissues called Gagarin the First and Gagarin Heritage that copy key features of the original watch. Interestingly, collectors note that finding an authentic 1961 Sturmansky is extremely hard. Many fakes and cobbled-together Franken-watches circulate in the market. Even when genuine pieces surface, they command high premiums. By contrast, the anniversary editions, often 40mm cases with altered movements, are relatively inexpensive, typically $250 to $300, but nonetheless embody the look of the original Gagarin watch. In any case, the 1961 Sturmansky remains an icon. Gagarin's own piece is encased under glass, yet its design lives on, reminding us of that first moment when man and machine marked time together in orbit.
Gagarin's flight opened the door not just for Soviet space watches, but for all of humanity's wristwatches in space. Over the next decades, a parade of timepieces would join humans beyond Earth. On the American side, early missions had no official issue. John Glenn elected not to wear a wristwatch on Mercury Atlas 6, relying on capsule clocks instead. But in 1962, the pendulum swung. During the Mercury Atlas 7 mission, astronaut Scott Carpenter requested a 24-hour dial chronograph and received a Breitling Navitimer cosmonaut. Carpenter's cosmonauts, engraved Navitimer Cosmonauts Carpenter Space Fact Ltd., became the first Swiss-made wristwatch in space. Breitling cleverly had labeled its 24-hour Navitimer Cosmonaut after this, to honor Carpenter's flight. That same year, 1962, the Omega Speedmaster made the debut in space when astronaut Wally Schirra wore it on the Sigma 7 mission, which some call the first intentional wristwatch in space.
By 1965, NASA had concluded rigorous endurance tests and officially certified the Omega Speedmaster Professional for all manned missions. These became the Moonwatch, when Buzz Aldrin famously wore one on Apollo 11. Neil Armstrong left his Speedmaster inside the lunar module as a backup timer. Meanwhile, the Soviet program moved forward too. In 1965, cosmonaut Alexei Leonov stepped off Voskhod 2 and became the first person to walk in space. Ticking on his wrist was a Polyot Strela 3017 chronograph, a 37mm 3-register stopwatch-style watch with a white dial and striking red accents. It performed perfectly, even as Leonov had to float free in vacuum, and helped solidify Strela's place in space history. Later cosmonauts on Salyut and Mir stations often wore large Polyot chronographs, caliber 3133, for onboard tasks and EVA timing. In fact, one endurance milestone belongs to Russia's watchmakers. During the 1994-1995 Soyuz TM-19 mission, cosmonaut Valery Polyakov spent 437 days in orbit on Mir, and the Fortis cosmonaut's chronograph on his wrist holds the record as the longest continually worn watch in space.
Fortis, a Swiss brand, had cooperated with Roscosmos to produce that sturdy 38mm chrono for Mir crew members.
Other notable spacefarers include William Bill Pogue of Skylab 4 in 1973, who famously wore a Seiko 6139-6005 Pogue automatic chronograph on his 84-day mission. NASA had not provided him with a watch for Skylab, so the colorful yellow dial Seiko he purchased for Earth use got to ride along, making it the first automatic chronograph in space. Even another NASA pilot, Wally Schirra's 1962 Omega, and the Bulova lunar pilot that Commander Dave Scott wore on Apollo 15 when Aldrin's Speedmaster crystal popped out, have become legendary space heritage timepieces. By the Space Shuttle and ISS era, digital and quartz watches entered the arena. Astronauts liked the shock-resistant Casio G-Shock for workouts and spacewalks. In fact, G-Shocks were among the first consumer watches approved for shuttle flights and have been taken on many missions. Luxury brands also remain involved. Russians flying Soyuz often choose their own Polyuk or Fortis watches, and American crews are famously free to bring personal devices. Astronaut Scott Kelly once wore a Rolex Submariner as his second watch on the International Space Station. Throughout it all, one theme remains. The space environment poses special challenges for watches, and yet the basic mission, telling time reliably, has not changed. Mechanical watches sent into space still require lubrication that won't thicken in microgravity, hairsprings that can cope with magnetism, and seals that hold in vacuum. Quartz watches had to prove their crystals wouldn't shatter in vibrations. Modern space-ready watches like the Fortis B42, an updated cosmonaut chronograph, and analog-digital hybrids like the Omega Speedmaster X33 are built with titanium or high-grade steel, anti-magnetic alloys, and extreme thermal tolerances. Moreover, legibility is crucial. High-contrast dials and bright lume ensure time can be read in dim spacecraft modules or against the black sky. NASA itself recognized these needs early on. By the Gemini and Apollo programs, after testing many brands, NASA selected the Speedmaster as the only manned space-rated watch. Today, that tradition continues. Astronauts on the ISS often carry a standard Omega X33, a quartz Flightmaster, or even specialty chronometers from Russian makers that have been flight qualified by Roscosmos. Technology has evolved, but one could argue the fundamental reasons for a space watch stay much the same. High-precision quartz and even atomic clocks on-board stations now track mission time and orbital dynamics, reducing critical reliance on a wristwatch. Wearable devices have entered space too. Scientists have astronauts wear devices like an ActiWatch or Fitbit to monitor sleep, health, and activity. Yet for the individual astronaut or cosmonaut, the wristwatch remains a useful backup and personal memento. It marks mission milestones. Some shuttle astronauts engrave their watches after a flight, just as early pilots did, and provides a psychological tether to normal life. As NASA's research has noted, even special watches are now part of human spaceflight science. Crews use monitors on the wrist to study heart rates, sleep patterns, and how humans adapt to space.
More than 60 years after Gagarin's flight, the legacy of that first Shturmanskia endures. Today's spacefarers still have a surprising array of timepieces to choose from. Some stick to classical mechanical chronographs. Others prefer the convenience of digital or smartwatches. Several astronauts have even been photographed wearing an Apple Watch in orbit. But if you ask an old-school astronaut or cosmonaut, they'll tell you the original space race style holds a special place in their kit bag. After all, whenever a crew member straps on a watch and announces "time check," It harks back to Yuri Gagarin looking at his wrist and calling out, "Chassis idut." The watch is running, as proudly as he could. In the end, the first watch in space was more than a gadget. It was and is a symbol of exploration. It reminds us that even among the infinite cosmos, humans will always carry something to count every precious second. This is Watch Immortal.